Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry, from tech companies that enable wineries to operate at maximum efficiency, to today's guest, Joe Fattorini, whose work over the past 20 years has brought new levels of wine appreciation to people around the world. Today's episode, it's sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, if you're a business looking to retain a winery or craft beverage producer as a client, Barrels Ahead will figure out a plan to make it happen. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. I am super excited today to talk with Joe Fattorini. Joe is the presenter of Sundance and Acorn TV's The Wine Show, which is now in its third season. He's also the trade director of Pix, a new wine discovery platform. A couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Paul Mabry, the founder of Pix, and was excited to delve in a little bit deeper into this platform. Welcome to the show, Joe.
My last job, I would go back and I worked for Berry Brothers and Rods, and we sold wine to the Queen, amongst other people. And so, I would go back and you'd be doing the wine show one day, I would fly back in and then I'd be in a meeting. I had a very odd thing there because once we filmed part of season 2 in Berry Brothers, it was actually before I joined, this beautiful old 17th century shop. So I think the shop opened in 1698. So I think it's the oldest wine shop in the world. So I went in and had some meetings one day. And then I came out of the door and there was a lady, it turned out she was from Vietnam. And she literally fell off the pavement into the road.
Oh, geez.
And I was terrified she was going to get run over. I sort of ran across and helped her up. And she was looking staggered. Anyway, it turned out that as part of a trip coming from Vietnam, she'd come to where the wine show was filmed and was literally taking a photo on her phone. As to her, the presenter walked out of the front door and she was so staggered, she literally sort of fell backwards into the road. And I'd say, no, this is just like where I work. This is my office. I come in and sell wine. So, she had to take a selfie. She was lovely. We had quite a long chat. It was great fun.
That's funny. Before, I do want to talk about Pix, but I gotta talk a little bit about your history. I mean, it's a storied history. You've done a lot of stuff, but my background's in philosophy, and I saw on your website that you have a degree in a master's of philosophy in food and religion. Tell me about that and how it's it had to have shaped your life.
It did, and that's actually probably the only thing where my mother is terribly proud of me because she's a great scholar of religion. Actually, she found it fascinating. I went to a hotel school as part of a big business school in Scotland. So I lived in Glasgow in Scotland for 18 years, which does mean I'm bilingual because Glaswegian is so impossibly difficult for the rest of the world to understand, but I can follow it. And I once took an American one on a date and we went to watch Train Spotting. And apart from being astonished that they had to have subtitles in the United States for it, she also came out and we never met again. When I sort of said, there's this film, it's about where I come from. That was it. I'm never ever dating you again. When I left it, I finished my degree, I was asked to come back and I came back to teach and I did an MPhil. And in the UK, weirdly, I said, well, can I not do a PhD? And I had this tutor and he said, oh no, he said, PhDs are rather modern German qualifications. He said, it was a sort of class thing that you did an MPhil instead, because that was what smart academics did. And so I did this one. It's about that looking fundamentally, the big question I sort of had to answer was, do religions, do they use food simply because it's nearby and it's useful and it's a thing that you can manipulate in some ways to, if you like, make sense of the world? Or is it a way of codifying things that are on the whole quite good rules to follow? Like, don't eat shellfish if you live in the desert. That's a pretty good rule to follow. So you then codify that within a sort of religious sort of leaning. And actually, one of the things that I came to the conclusion is, yes, that possibly sometimes happens, but actually what's much more useful is you go and take a thing that is kind of malleable, like food, and that you interact with every day, And you tell a story about yourself through the way that you interact with it and the rules that you impose on it and the kinship that you have. And it's bizarrely useful because ever since then, I've sort of spent my entire life understanding how people do that with wine, really. And that's one of those big, one of those big differences I have in some ways with the world of wine. And it's one of those things that comes through in Picks. I genuinely don't think we're that objective about the way we enjoy wine. It's nice for us to think we're very objective about it. It's why I have a real thing about I just don't think that palate matching apps provide anything useful. Because what suits your palate at home on a Thursday night watching the TV, it's a totally different thing to what suits your palate when you're in a really smart restaurant trying to impress somebody, you know, on a date, whatever that sort of thing is. And actually, it's a bit like religion. And there's an element actually in Picks, and we're looking at various routes in. And one of the things that people can do, it's a search bar. You type in a search bar. But from my experience as a retailer, some people come in saying, I want an answer to this problem. So I want a wine from the Napa Valley. I want something that goes with spaghetti bolognese. I want a gift that I can send to, Spokane, Washington. The other thing, some people come in and they're a tribe. It's like a religion. So I remember when I was a very young wine merchant, people would come in, and if somebody's wearing a tweed suit with +2s, I don't know if you've ever worn +2s, it's like breeches. Those sort of golf trousers with long socks. They've been shooting normally.
Okay.
They're a tribe. You're fundamentally going to go for white Burgundy, pretty ropey, stringy old claret, a bottle of port, some sherry. There's a whole series of things that I kind of know that tribally, that's what you belong to. Somebody comes in and they've got lots of tattoos and a big beard. Natural wine. Good. Right. Let's go and get you in the natural wine store. And that's actually what I did in my MPhil. It's tribes. It's people explaining who they are to the rest of the world through what they drink. And funnily enough, in the United States, in some of the research, because I then did lots of research around that when I was at university, and one of the big bits was I did a paper, and it was explaining why British people love critics to write tasting notes, whereas Americans were much more based around scores. And one of the things was, I used the example, it's Thorstein Veblen. If you've ever come across Veblen goods, he was the man who invented the term conspicuous consumption. And a Veblen good is something which is more desirable the more expensive it gets. But he wrote in a slightly satirical book, The Theory of the Leisure Class, he wrote about how moneyed turn of the century sort of F. Scott Fitzgerald Americans, they turned their jobs. They didn't want to be seen as louche. They didn't want to be seen as like European aristocrats. They wanted to turn their hobbies into kind of jobs. So they became connoisseurs. I think he used the term creditable viands and beverages. But if your wine portfolio is entirely scored, it's kind of like the stock market. It's sort of on a scale. Whereas Hugh Johnson, great British writer, he always said, how can I give a wine a score? Because it's like scoring my friends. So in European context, we tend to view it much more in a sense of, well, how would I describe my friends? And some people, you really like them, but you only want to see them once a year. Other people you met on holiday, and it was great fun for 2 weeks. But to be honest, you wouldn't be fussed if you never met them again. Some people you like to meet once a week for a bit of a cozy drink down the pub. And wine descriptions allow you to go and have those. So it is bizarrely useful, actually, an MPhil on food and religion, he said. But yeah, I come back to that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, a little bit of a sidebar. I just finished reading the book Entangled by Merlin Sheldrake, and it's about fungi and the interrelationships of fungi. And he does talk about how religions have shaped the perceptions of fungi. And traditionally, like in a Christian English religion, fungi was not really, it was like the devil's thing. It was something that's decaying, versus some of the South American religions, they celebrated fungus. And it really, the general perception of it was really shaped by that.
Completely. And you see how long those sort of traditions last. We're based at the moment in Sweden, and I'm reading a fascinating book it's called The Children of the Ash and the Elm. about Vikings.
Mhm.
And amongst the things that you just, Vikings have fascinating, now there's a wine element to this. They have these amazing relationships with people in the forests. Norwegians are still obsessed with trolls and spirits in the forest. This is 1400 years ago that there was this sort of Viking age, and yet it still sort of sits in there. The one of the things they found in lots of halls is this sudden explosion in wine paraphernalia. And it was clear that the ruling class of Vikings, since that long ago, wine was a social thing. It was a way of marking yourself out. And even to this day, and even with the monopoly markets, it's a classy thing to go and drink wine, in this part of the world. Whereas it's so different from it being an everyman drink when you go to places like France and Italy and Spain, where it's much more the common man's drink, if you like. It's these northern cultures who've embedded it into that sort of elite culture, and those things become very useful. And anybody, retailers just naturally know this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're a wine retailer. If you've dragged a bag, you just kind of know it, and you have it in your sort of gut. Sometimes actually wine communicators don't really know it because they've never the ability to, if you like, survive on shifting the stuff. It's a great motivator.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you survive because you're going and selling it. And you're selling words. And so your understanding of how wine relates to people actually isn't as intense as wine retailers, wine merchants, because they're the ones, who it really matters that they can shift it. And, it's quite nice. I'm very glad at Pix that we have that kind of culture that goes, actually, who are the guys in the room, who are the women in the room who've sold this stuff? Oh, right, you. Okay, what do you think? Is this the way it's going to go and work? And then, wine tech, and we've seen this extraordinary shift towards wine online.
Absolutely.
And I say if you are a retailer, if you're a winery, trust your instincts when it comes to this. You actually know much more as a winery or as a retailer than you perhaps have the confidence to think that you do, because actually what's to happen. The tech is a tool. That's all it is, and it does exactly the same thing. But it executes the same process that you've been doing for ages. The really important bit is that you're in control of that process, and you say it's like this. And there are some amazing things that are out there. And don't try and read into it how I'm sort of knocking, but it's not the best way when somebody goes, I've got this amazing piece of technology, it does an amazing technical thing. Let's find how we can apply this to wine.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you end up doing is, and I can give you an example. Years ago, I was involved in an app called Plonk.
Oh, yes.
Plonk was a very early app. I was wine retailer. And the idea was you answered a series of questions and it would say, right, this is your wine type.
Is this the, do you like your coffee with milk or
it was
sugar, exactly. That type of,
Totally that. It's totally that. And then we started seeing all this data coming in. And one of the interesting bits was that we knew where people were using the app from the geolocation.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out, this was in the UK, it turned out that there was one particular group who were big users whose palates apparently changed at Waterloo Station. And it was quite specific, it was Waterloo Station. And what we worked out was that when they were at home, which is broadly in southwest London, so you go from Battersea, sort of Vauxhall out to the southwest, they all drank Australian Shiraz. When they got on the Waterloo and City line and went into the City of London, where they all worked in finance, they all drank claret. Because it's situationally different. When you've just done a deal, big private equity deal, well, you all go out and you drink claret because that's what you go and do when you've done a big private equity deal. When you're at home in Barnes or Wimbledon, well, you crack open a bottle of Penfolds because that's what you do when you're at home. The notion that your palate, of course the palates didn't change at all. It was just showing that actually the app couldn't tell, it wasn't able to tell causally. What was the cause of why they were drinking those things? And yet it was a clever app. Everybody was like, oh, we can do this thing. Let's apply it to wine. That's not actually how we should work with wine. We should go, how do people engage with wine? How do we make technology accelerate that process, make it easier, quicker, connect people together, answer problems more efficiently?
Yeah. Now, how is Pix tackling this issue? How is it doing it differently?
I tell you one big thing: listening to people like a lot. I joined Pix. I mean, I actually started working kind of last. I mean, I've been talking to Paul for a long time, and in fact, it's well over a year since we first talked about me coming along. But I probably joined last November, and an awful lot of the times listening to essentially wine sellers, and that can be anybody from a wine DTC winery, enterprise level wine businesses, right the way through to retailers. And then you also then go and talk in different ways to retailers. I'll give you sort of an example. So often wineries will come to us and they'll say, do you think it could go and do this? And we go, I don't know, let's go and find out. Let's go and see what it is. And actually the way it came about, we sort of said to wineries, okay, what would you like? We said to wine sellers, what would we like? Well, we'd like a platform where it doesn't cost us anything to go on it. Okay, fine. Okay, we'll do that. And we would like to be able to own the customer data, which means that the transaction happens with us. And I'm going, yeah, okay, I'm not getting much out of this deal, but we'll work on that. And it needs to be free for users to use so that we can get lots and lots of users. So I'm like, okay, so we can settle this thing up. I haven't worked out how we make any money, but yeah, okay. So then what we came up with this notion that, okay, we create it like Google. It's exactly like Google. So yeah, free to use, free to list on. You transact on your website, whoever you are as a wine seller. So you keep that customer data. We don't take a cut. We don't, bill you for the customers you've had. If you want to jump to the front of the queue, essentially like a Disney World Fast Pass, then we do keyword bidding for interesting keywords. And you can get quite sophisticated now with the way that works. So it's not just, oh, can I buy Napa? Which I have to tell you is a terrible keyword. You might want to say, look, every time my key competitor jumps up on a search, I would like to sit next door to them. Or I want to bid for people looking for food to go with Italian wine within a 5-mile radius of my store because I've got half a pallet of Montepulciano di Rosso that I need to go and move before the next load comes in. So yeah, we came that way. The stuff that we got from the other side was, lots of users said we hate doom scrolling. What's good value to us is not cheap. Yes, sometimes I want the cheapest offer or the best value offer. What's more important is I trust who I'm buying it from, that I can find out who's down the road. I'm actually not buying it for me, I'm buying it for somebody else. So I want to know who's going to be able to deliver it to me reasonably efficiently. I actually want to get on the winery's mailing list. Can I buy it direct from the winery rather than going through a 3-tier retailer? So there's lots of those parts. And another string to my bow is I'm a behavioral scientist. So I teach a lot and lecture a lot on behavioral science. That sounds slightly removed. A lot of it is, how do we turn shoppers into buyers? How do we get that thing where we sort of say to people, let's give you the right information, which isn't necessarily lots. It's often the right information that gets you to that point where you go, okay, yeah, that suits me. So things like, rather than, we always assume, oh, customer reviews are amazing. They're not really. Did you ever hear that thing? I think it was in Napa that the French Laundry had the same open table score as McDonald's. I think that was true. And it was on the basis, it was because they did genuinely merit the same score. Like, the French Laundry is amazing, but it's really expensive. So I think it had like a 4.2 or something, because people said it was really, really good, but it's like so expensive. And they're like, McDonald's is very cheap, but it guarantees that you won't get diarrhea if you eat at 2 o'clock in the morning. So it's like a 4.2, sort of diarrhea-free midnight dining that's really cheap, 4.2. And yet they're so far apart. And wine is kind of the same. Natural wine will all come up as a sort of 3.8, and yet it's nobody's 3.8. It's either a 5 or a 2. Nobody in the world goes, oh, natural wine, well, it's sort of all right, it's kind of okay. You either love it or loathe it. So we're doing away with that. And professional scores, I think, is a slightly different matter. You've got kind of professional critics, but actually guiding people through things like a Netflix tagging. I think that's important. How do we go and guide people into saying, these are wines, sometimes around particular flavor characteristics, but for this sort of mood, we know the number one need states around people. We know people buy wine around need state, perhaps more than style. So they go, my need state is, I want to put my feet up, I'm quite done in. Tomorrow night, I'll be done in, feet up, nice bottle of wine. What suits that kind of need state? Some other people I've got friends around. I don't want to be embarrassed. I want to go and be a little bit flash, not too flash. I want to treat myself. I'm kind of into this. What's a level up? So having that sort of tagging, I think, is key. So we're building lots of those things into the platform. I'm rambling now. I hope that's all right.
No, that's fantastic. I like what you're talking about, the need state and the behavioral. As far as and does the platform then recommend that based on what the person's looking for?
Yeah, and actually we have sort of two tiers. So we have David Round, Master of Wine. The loveliest man. I have to tell you, you have to meet David Round. He's just so utterly wonderful. And he is our head of wine. He couldn't believe his luck when he got the job, because he sort of said, "Oh, I'm really sorry." I said, I've got to go and judge some wine awards, so I'll take some days out of my holiday and stuff. We said, no, we'll pay you to go and judge wine awards. He said, really? It's like, you're the only people in the world who pay me. We said, we need you to know what's trending, what's happening, you know, and to be able to honestly come and say, you know what, I can recommend bits and pieces, you know, and start building that. So his first tier, along with a group of students he has actually from the Napa Valley Wine Academy, is to do things like, if you like A, what else are you going to like? It's kind of similar, but, you know, different. What are we going to pull out for those tribes? So what are a series of classic wines? What are a series of kind of funky, fashionable wines? What are some treats that you can go and build in? So he's building that up. Now, over time, we have a very clever computer. Don't ask me to explain it. I got to graph database and Neo4j, and I then switched off. But it actually starts to learn that kind of thing, and it starts to go, I can see how people are making these connections. I can see how you've made these interesting connections, so I'll have a bit of a stab in the same way Spotify does. And actually, when you start to think about what Spotify does, you know, particularly Spotify playlists, I think there's a really close analogy actually with Spotify. Spotify playlists are about right.
They are.
You know, they're nice for dinner parties. You'll never get a Spotify playlist that comes, or very rarely when it comes up with something and you go, wow, I love that. What was it? Pink Shiny Ultra Blast Dance AM, I think it's called, is one of those songs where Spotify served it me up and I went, I love this. This is absolutely brilliant. It happens about 3 times a year. Now, I hope it nails it with your wine selections, maybe a bit more than that. But actually, it's going to be really good at going, oh, I know you kind of like these things. Here's a selection of stuff, and I'm going to give you some tools to narrow in whether it's exactly for you. So it gets you into a kind of playlist, and then it says, here's some little extra blurbs that let you go, no, that really is for me. You know, boy, I'm a big Chablis fan. This is like, I mean, I'll give you quite an interesting example. If you're a kind of big Chablis fan, I want the machine to come up and say, Simpson's Chardonnay from Kent in England is totally your bag. Because it's something, it's like Chablis taste as it used to taste. And we're wanting to go and find ways where we go and get those connections, and we help people discover, and they go, wow, Kentish Chardonnay is for me. Linear, you know, dry, gorgeously refined Chardonnay. That's my sort of cup of tea. So that's the sort of work that we're doing at the moment, and David leads all of that.
That's fantastic. It reminds me of what you would normally only get that on the sales floor with someone that actually knew their shit. Like when you're going into the wine store, they would know based on your dress, based on your character, the fact that you bought Chablis in the past. I would know exactly who to recommend. If I saw that person walk in, I would know exactly how to recommend that wine from Kent. And your platform's doing that work for you.
I say will do, I think is probably the best way of putting this.
What's
so
an
one
ideal?
of those bits, and we do have to ask for permission. I used the analogy the other day. I said, you know that bit in in Ghost, and there's Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore, and they're making the thing. At the moment, it's a bit of a lump of clay. We've kind of got our thumbs into it, and it's a cup. We haven't made the very tall, elegant vase bit yet. We'll get there, and in 2 ways we get there. What do we have at the moment? 3,500, 4,000 wine sellers who are part of PICS. So we're bringing in their wines. Some of them are producers, some of them are retailers. So
that's amazing. And at the time we're recording this, PICS is not live yet.
Because
So
it's not live
we're
yet.
actually
No.
recording this for October, so we should be live by then. But it's amazing to have 3,000 to 4,000 retailers already for a
Yeah,
pre-launch.
this is it within our beta test. To the point, actually, at Christmas, we were getting so many, we had to stop it. And we didn't do any more ringing people up. We just said, well, we got enough. Because then we realized we had a total category, an inventory within the beta test of about 350,000 wines.
Holy
something like
moly.
that. And then an offer universe of around 13 to 15 million offers on those wines. So you imagine some will only pop up once, some will pop up in 50 retailers, 100 retailers across the United States, so some we get a sort of magnitude of difference there. So yeah, we sort of bring those people in, and there's a real mix of different retailers who sort of come in there. So we actually, where we started out, and when I first made the calls, it was really important to me. I said, people said, you just, let's go and talk to one or two really big guys. No, I want to go and talk to small little DTC wineries. I want this to be a place where if I'm a DTC winery, I can, if you like, fight on my own terms. Now actually you can, because when people start getting into searches and things, we can go and find you a group of people who really like your kind of wines that we can really connect you up with. You're not just going to be item 5,342 or something on a long list. It's allowing us to go and home people in. Now, it will take us a while to go and fashion that clay, to go and build it out. We'll grow out from those 4,000, 3,500, 4,000 retailers. There was 144,000 wines a year coming to the United States, something like that.
Oh yeah.
So
it sounds like you're forming tribes.
Yes.
You are helping these small D2C wineries find their tribe, and their tribe may not be those people that visit the winery.
Absolutely, and we know one of the big challenges, I think, for DTC is sometimes breaking out. And I can't remember what the statistic was about the number of people who buy DTC wines who live within something like 20 miles of the winery. Like the vast 90% of people tend to live in the state of California, who are state of California wineries. And yet there are people out there who'd really love to go and try these wines. And of course, the same is true of, well, every state in the union makes wine. Effectively, It's a national industry. So yes, and a guy sent me a note the other day. He said, I'm so excited to be part of the PICS movement. It's like, wow, we're doing all right if we're sort of ready for a T-shirt with a fist on it.
Yeah.
We're on our way. That's brilliant stuff. So, and I think people do see it as, and I hope so. Yes, we want it to be a successful business. We want to go and grow. But I think all of us, Paul, me, David, we've all been banging on about this forever. I mean, lots of people listening to this will go, oh, crikey, I've heard Paul maybe banging on about e-commerce and wine online forever and a day. I never thought he'd shut up. I've been sort of banging on about finding better ways to connect to, when I say the broad audience, I don't mean, yes, I love selling wine to everybody, but the wine show's audience are intelligent, sophisticated people with smart jobs. In every strata of society, we do really well amongst nurses. So there's loads of nurses and midwives, particularly in the UK. It must be a hard job being a nurse and a midwife in the UK. Police officers. I've got a great friend, Cranny, he's called, and he was an armed police officer at number 10 Downing Street. He was a huge fan of the show, still keeps in touch with me now. So you get this amazing array of people who've got, good jobs, and they like to go home, they like to have a glass of wine, and they are underserved, partly not by anyone in particular, but just by the way that things are structured. They just want sometimes a bit of simpler information. They want to get closer to the retailer. They're sometimes a bit embarrassed about asking for stuff in a shop. And I know somebody came up and he said, oh, the problem you'll have is that nobody will want to go and pull out when we go on our mobile app, because we're starting on the online desktop. But he said, nobody will want to pull that out in a shop. I would argue the opposite. I think that there are wine people don't like pulling out an app in a shop. Most people would rather do that than be really embarrassed in front of a sales assistant. They shouldn't need to be.
Well, I can see this. The sales assistants start to walk over and they pull out their phone and look very busy. So I would actually agree that they would be pulling out their phones.
We did have one thing where, I mean, we can be quite, we were talking, and this is a future state. This is where we're heading to. And it's entirely, this isn't me doing science fiction. This is entirely possible. It's just a question of getting there. We have quite a lot of geolocation, if you like, within phones, and we're able to go and do some quite interesting stuff around keyword bidding done by geographers and so on. What would really work for me is if I walked into a wine store somewhere. So I'm in DC, I walk into a wine store. If my Pix app told me the 5 wines it thought that I would really enjoy, I got to tell you, I would buy all 5 of them. Oh, yeah. And I know about wine, but I know it would probably throw up 5 wines that I'm unlikely to have ever tried before. They'll be a bit out of the ordinary. They'll be, my kind of thing. I also know I'm a total sucker for that kind of thing. It makes my life easier. And I'll browse around and I'll look at all the bits and I'll go, yeah, I'll have the ones on my phone. Can I just have these things? And that's me. I'm kind of into wine. I'm really engaged with it. I'm not saying I won't sometimes go and say, look, I'll leave that to one side. I am on the hunt. I want Cote Roti from a specific vintage. I'd really like it to smell of old horses. That will be me on other occasions. But we'll change as we go through the week.
I love being sold wine. I mean, having sold wine for years, I love it when I'm in a position where someone's actually recommending stuff, and I usually buy all of it. And then taking your Spotify thing, I can see your vision where you've got 5 wines. 2 of them are going to be right in the middle of that like recommendation pool. One's going to be on the outskirts to the right. One's going to be outskirts to the left. And you're going to then kind of push your appreciation of those wines and find something new.
We use the term sometimes a lot of it being a discovery platform. Discovery, we know, this is me going back to my Phil, discovery is one of those things that is important for us conceptually on our wine journey, if you like. And we talk about people saying, I'm on a wine journey. Discovering new things is a really important part of why people get into wine. People often have a favorite beer and they kind of go back to it. Yes, some people have a favorite wine, but actually for a lot of people, part of the charm of it and the joy of it is going and discovering new things all the time. But it's hard to do because, discovery brings with it risk. We're going off into, the new world, and what am I going to go and find? And there be, giants kind of thing. So, and I think that is quite a deep-seated, almost evolutionary trait in people. So where we were able to go and say, yeah, we're going to help you discover, just not that far. We're just going to take you to the next station on the river. We're not going to go the full Colonel Kurtz. We're just going to go a couple of stops up, and then we'll stop and we'll sort of take you that bit further. That becomes a very attractive thing because people sort of say, oh, go along a little bit. And discovery is more than 1 or 2 things. One thing we do know, we tend to think sometimes of wine choices being linear. So somebody comes in and they gradually narrow down their choices until they come to the thing that they want. Turns out that's actually not true. We've done quite a lot of interesting wider work, some very good research from Google's UK team, actually. What happens is people actually go into 2 modes. They come in, particularly in an e-commerce thing, and to a degree, actually, in regular retail. They start by exploring. They swirl around and they explore a number of options. They then go into an evaluation mode, and they swirl around and they evaluate whether that's the right answer for them. Now, if you've got a very linear sales funnel idea, and a lot of e-commerce is quite linear, the problem is that if it's the right, if when they're evaluating it, it's not the right answer, well, they've either got to go right back to the beginning or they just drop out altogether. And we see this a lot where you've got these kind of sales funnel ideas that people just go, well, that wasn't really what I was looking for. I'll go away somewhere else. Or, oh, I've got to go back to the beginning again now. We've tried to build it in where we give people the options to kind of evaluate. If it's not quite right, here are some other exploratory options, which is broadly, you might also like these things. So it's a little bit different. And then they go through this cycle again. There's a kind of figure of 8. They go, right, explore a bit. Okay, right. Test out those evaluations. And those evaluations are often based around, is it the right answer to my problem? So it's things like, is it the right grape variety? Is it classy enough? Is it taste the right sort of thing? Will it go with lamb? It's also, can I buy it in the next 20 minutes? Will somebody deliver it to my friends? Do I have to buy it by the case? Can I get a single bottle? It's that sort of a loop, and trying to keep all those things in mind is quite interesting and challenging in creating a user experience.
Yeah, I like how you're showing almost an infinite loop, like a figure 8, whereas originally I was thinking of a flywheel, but yours is actually a little more complex because you go down, you dip around.
Yeah. It's funny, you should say that. You were saying about fungi, the way this. One of the things I've learned, you may not know this, but I'm British, and amongst the things I've learned is that fanny pack means something very, very different in the United States, and the other is that there's this word flywheel. And I'd never come across this idea of flywheel. And so this sort of notion, it gets used a lot, but it's become sort of embedded that flywheels are amazing things. But actually, they're just circular. They just kind of run around. And so people get into their mind this sort of thing about things running around. And actually, you want to say, no, sometimes you need to jump off and go and do the other flow and then come back in again. And it's funny how sometimes when isn't it called, what's the I can't remember the name of it. It's there's that hypothesis that the way we view the world is often written by the words that we use. So if you've got a language who has no word for the color blue, it sort of doesn't exist to them. And it's one of those bits when you get words that sort of come in, and I've certainly found that in the world of wine, that sometimes there are terms about wine that get used a lot in the UK that aren't used at all in the United States. And so, of course, that thing never really gets looked for. It just sort of almost doesn't exist. Of course, it's there as an objective thing, but nobody really digs into it. Gooseberry is a very common one.
I was just going to say gooseberry or lychee.
Gooseberries and lychees, gooseberry, very useful if you're selling wine in Ukraine. Turns out they're obsessed with gooseberries. They really like it.
That's funny.
But we see a bit of that, and we'll have to refine that as we go around the world. I remember, I'm trying to remember the name. There's a Chinese. It was when we made the wine show, and a brilliant guy, Yang Lu, master sommelier. He's also doing the MW, and he said one of the biggest problems he had in translating Western tasting terms for Chinese audiences was that you could do it literally, but then it meant that you used words like butter toast that meant nothing to anybody in China because they didn't have toast and they didn't have butter. You could then go and say, well, what does it literally sort of taste of using a word for us, which was better. So you did get certain words. And so one of those was like wolfberry, yang mei it's called, and it's even better actually than our raspberry notes for Côte de Nuit, because it literally tastes like the Côte de Nuit. We sort of say, oh, it's kind of raspberry strawberry. Actually, it tastes of yang mei, I can tell you. He said but those come with no emotional resonances.
Very.
So he said in Meursault, butter toast is quite, it's maternal. It's sort of comforting. It's kind of, reminds you of your childhood. And he said, we were fiddling around trying to find words that have this, because none of them have that. Anyway, it turns out that when you get that Chinese breakfast rice, apparently it's not uncommon if your mum's busy or your dad getting everything ready, it'll crust on the side of it. And he said, but it's really tasty. And so whatever the word was for the burnt rice, the slightly toasted rice on your breakfast cooking, and he said it brings in all those memories of being a young child in China and you're on a cold day and your mum saying, well, thank you, go and have that, it'll be good, and sending you off for breakfast. He said that's the word we use to describe Meursault now. It's such a lovely story the way it all came together.
Oh, that's fantastic. The full evocative emotions behind just the aroma or just the actual fruit. It's really more about what that fruit represents.
Yeah. And if you ever want to really, can I say arsey about it, English word, you always end up using the word Proustian. Oh, it's Proustian. It's Proustian. It's like a cup of tea and a Madeleine cake, and then you write an incredibly long, boring book about it. It's not boring as a Proust, I'm sorry. It's that sort of Proustian notion of it. But it is true. And of course, isn't it, smell and aroma sits very close to the parts of your brain that connect with emotional memory and so on. And emotion can be inherited, whereas learned behavior can't. And so people can have inherited connections with some of those things as well. It's some really interesting stuff. Jamie Good writes very well on it in some of his bits. He's doing his book, I Taste Red. My mother is synesthesic, so she tastes in colour. And so she doesn't like green wines. That does not mean what we would say green wines, because when you say what does she like, she says she likes purple wines. But green and orange ones she doesn't like, but she does like purple. And it's because when she tastes them, she gets vivid images of colour in her mind as a synesthetic taster. And it's not uncommon, actually. Every so often, I've quite often met synesthetic tasters, and it's weird because they sort of say, yeah, I just really like red stuff with, blue flecks on it. And it's nothing to do with the colour of the wine. It's how they perceive it in their
Just
head.
the perception of it. Now, how's PIX dealing with all these cultural differences and nuances as you go across the world?
Actually, what we do, we're starting in the United States and the UK, because in fairness, to be honest, they're similar markets. They're both the largest and most valuable consumer sort of import markets in the world. They're both quite sophisticated markets as well. So they're really interesting places to go and use as test beds with, and when I say sophisticated, actually the industries within them are sophisticated. You've got incredibly experienced retailers from very, very small to very, very large. But you've got people who understand the market very well in the United States and, of course, in the UK. The UK has this really interesting secondary market, particularly because it's a big centre of wine trading. If you take the Latinx community in the United States, I was looking at it as a wine market. It's bigger than, I think, both Brazil and South Korea. And so before you trundle off and go to South Korea or Brazil, actually, you want to make sure.
I lost you there for a second there, Joe. I don't know if I saw the screen go away, but the last 20 seconds.
Okay, no worries.
I was in hysteria. We'll edit that out.
It's fine.
It was more like
I can jump back. I'll jump into roughly where I kind of think I know you were. Before we go, and so we were talking about the United States and the UK. Before we go out to, let's say we take South Korea as a wine market. So yes, we could go and get involved with the South Korean wine market, but actually, a bigger market is the Latinx community in the United States. And in a way, it's more interesting to go and make sure that we've really got to grips with actually what's a very valuable, really interesting market within a market that we're already serving, going and looking after that. I've talked a lot with people like Julia Coney or Tanisha Townsend, who've done some really interesting work talking about the power of the BIPOC wine consumer markets in the United States. Actually, I want to make sure that we're going and properly serving the US and the UK across its entire population, because then we know we can take that to Canada, Australia, Anglophone markets in the first instance, which are different, but they're not hugely different. Then you can sort of migrate into other sort of markets. Look at Germany, which again is a little bit sort of different. It's sort of nuances, or Denmark, which is quite an interesting small market. You can kind of do some tests there. In the end, it's 124, 128 or something markets that we'd really love to go and be in, and you sort of roll out through to them. But I think you want to make sure you can properly nail it at home with those two big key markets first, and make sure that we set ourselves up right from the beginning, and it was a very early part of the business. So we said we wanted to be this platform that was genuinely embraced. I mean, when I say diversity, I mean it really lived it as part of its the way it was working, and that it was genuinely inclusive. And actually, that's quite hard to do. You've got to make sure you do it right. You've got to really you've got to do the work in that phrase. And that means not suddenly racing and going, where's the next market? Where's the next market? It's making sure you properly served everybody in those markets that you first say, yeah, we're going to come and serve you as a market. And we've had some brilliant, phenomenal responses. People have been, we had a great post. Now, this is going out in October. So this was in July. We got the drop, which is our online publication. I'm always wary of talking about the drop because it's editorially wholly independent. Yeah. So it's a bit like the New York Times editorial and commercial team, and I know them, but we don't spend a lot of time engaging. And they do what they do. There's a brilliant thing yesterday. I had a friend of mine, actually, Jermaine Stone, the real Wolf of Wine, who has the Wine Hip Hop Show, and he had a thing. It was like, what's your 3 desert island wines? And it's great. We haven't seen voices like that coming into the traditional wine trade, being absolutely at the heart of it, and going and engaging with people, in other parts of the wine sector nearly enough. So it's lovely to go and have that before we've even launched.
That's amazing. Very, very, almost the Spotify model. You've got your core, and you're just kind of slowly pushing out in the different geographies as you don't want to just jump completely to something completely unfamiliar. Just kind of push the boundaries.
Yeah, even in what we're doing, we just test, iterate, grow, and you've got to do it sort of gradually. I think I've learned a lot about Paul's just an inspirational leader. He's a great person to work with. Being in startups is really hard. Working in tech is even harder. And we learned fairly early on that, yes, we can go and do all these amazing things in the future, but all the time you just get 10 or 15 people, you try it with them, you see what the problems are, because you can scale up very rapidly in sort of technical solutions. And I would certainly say to this, when people are developing their own platforms, which certainly should, I think I've written some bits and pieces. Sorry for some yowking, but my 3-year-old is having a bath and he's having none of it in the background. He's a very tired boy. You can go and do an awful lot of absolutely amazing things at scale with technology. Mm-hmm. Just make sure you're doing them really, really well in small groups first. So even if it's your own little, store, get 5 or 10 people to go and test it first. Get 100 people to go and test it and just make sure it's working. Make sure you can accommodate those 100 people ordering things. Because what you don't want to go and do is suddenly go and open it out to the world and you've got 10,000 orders and that was what people found in COVID. They have these platforms that had only ever really been robustly tested up to like 10 orders a day. And I remember talking to people and they said, I've gone from 10 orders a day to 500. And I just can't cope with that. So it's, we're seeing that in our own little iterations.
Well, that's all. Those are good growing pains for sure, for sure. So, Joe, as we're kind of wrapping down, I got to ask you. You mentioned it. What are your 3 desert island wines?
And what did I pick? I know that there was a real luxurious
Not to steal that
one.
guy's thing, but
so when I did, the rules were you could have a luxurious one, you had a wild card, and you had something that was kind of everyday. It was more a thing that you went back to on a regular basis, and the wild card had to be something that wasn't very expensive. So Jermaine had an interesting Moscato, and he had some Le Flave, Puligny Montrachet, and that kind of stuff. So my luxury was it was the Kenobi Barolo from Bellotto, which I've had a number of vintages. I've been very lucky. I was there last year and got a lot of Bellotto Barolo. Although if you can't get it, I do recommend, it's a weird wildcard actually, they're Verduno, which is a sort of very pale red grape variety, which is fab. So that was that one. My go-to sort of every day, it was Felsina Beredegna Chianti Classico. With my name, you can imagine there's an Italian tilt to some of the wines. Yeah. I adore, you know what, if I was talking to Italian, I'd take Felsina Beredegna and I'd be kind of okay for a very long time. And then it's a special Solera of Palo Cortado sherry. And I'm a sherry nut. I'm completely obsessed with going and drinking lots of interesting sherry. And Palo Cortado is such a complete treat. And there's a sort of lovely historical thing about sort of sherry. You think back to London in the 16th, 17th century, and people were drinking sherry then. And one thing that we forget is that the highest quality wines then were mostly blends. It was, things like port and sherry and Madeira and things. It was all these blended vintages, even champagne, which kind of ironed out the peaks and the troughs. So yeah, that was my sort of bit. It's always just to make more people go and drink sherry, to be honest, because I'm sort of sherry loon. So those were my choices. It was quite hard though. I could have gone and had any number of other things.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I right along your lines with the Italian wines and 2 sherry for the outlier. I like it.
Brilliant. No, it's,
Joe, I'm gonna have to let you get on with your evening here. Make sure you got a busy day and you're right in the middle of this launch. So, Joe, where can people find out more about you?
Go to they can go and in fact anyone can email me, joe@pix.wine, pix Pix, joe@pix.wine. I would love to hear from anybody. We'll pick up and I will show you how very simple it is. It takes no effort to go and join Pix because we ingest data directly from people. So drop me an email, I'll show you how to go and do it. I'm also at Joe Fattorini on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere you want to go and find me. Kind of easy. So at Joe Fattorini anywhere, and do drop us a line. Love to hear from people.
Awesome, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Drew, it's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.